I think all of us can agree that living in America has been a wonderful blessing, a wonderful opportunity for each one of us, not only to have the freedom to study the Scriptures, to learn the will of God, and to be able to live the will of God without fear, but also it's a place where hard work, integrity, and honesty by itself brings money, brings reward, brings prosperity. And a lot of us, without ever having to do anything wrong, to ever do anything that would hinder our conscience or cause us to feel bad about ourselves, just doing what God asks us to do, which is to work hard for our employer, to develop ourselves, and to be a godly, righteous person at the workplace, and that brings reward. But we always need to keep in mind that Jesus warned us strongly about greed. Even though by doing everything God tells us to do, we might earn hundreds and thousands or even millions of dollars in our lifetime, and we've done everything a Christian ought to do, wealth itself now becomes something that we have to work with and we have to be concerned about. How are we using our money? Now it becomes a factor. We can live a godly life. We can be a success in our workplace. We can be looked up to by our peers. We can be considered to be a hard worker. But the fruits of that bring a responsibility, and we have to try to wrestle with the difference between ambition and greed. In our next slide, we'll see a verse that says, "Be on your guard against every form of greed." And you think about that for a minute. I thought there was only one kind of greed. What does Jesus mean? Every kind of greed. And it brings us an interesting question that we all have to ponder within ourselves, and that is, even though everything I have gained and everything that I am today, I have done rightfully and godly and holy, the fact that I have these things now puts me in a position where God may have to judge and condemn me by the use of those things that I earned legally, I earned by doing the things God has asked me to do. And so there are some things that we have to look at as we draw that line between the upward mobility of our American culture and the contentment that God has asked us to have. And so this is a lurking danger for all of us. It's not something like in many countries where you have to lie, you have to cheat, you have to steal, you have to be dishonest, you have to do things in order to get wealth. Here, you can get wealth doing everything that God has asked us to do. So when Jesus says, beware and be on your guard against every form of greed, have we ever done that? Most of us have money. We have a lot of money. We have enough money to buy a car, 2 cars. We have enough money to buy a home. We have enough money to buy televisions and computers. And not just one in 20 years, maybe one every 3 or 4 years. And where on that scale of what we can do, and which in and of itself wouldn't be wrong, it's certainly not a sin to buy a television. It's certainly not a sin to buy a computer. It's not a sin to own a home. But at some level, it becomes wrong. And finding that elusive line, because even now we might find ourselves on Judgment Day being told by God, you were not a good steward. But Lord, I didn't do anything wrong. I worked, I took my money, I gave a portion of it to you, but you were still greedy. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. I think that may hold a key, and we're going to come back to that a little bit later in the lesson. But what I would like for all of us to think about this morning is this lesson is not about the millionaires and the billionaires. This lesson is not about people who had to cheat or lie or steal to get what they have. This lesson is for each one of us to carefully consider, what are we doing with our money? What are we doing, and how is our money impacting or affecting the way God sees us and the way that we see God? And so the first question that I would like to ask us is, How would you define greed? If someone was greedy in America, what would that be? Now, we see fictional characters like Scrooge or Midas, and we say to ourselves, well, Scrooge was greedy, but he was greedy because he was not compassionate, and he was using his possessions to squeeze out of the poor, and so his greed was clear. Midas, of course, the story of the man, everything he could touch would turn to gold. The Old Testament talks about people who pant after the dust on the head of the poor. And you think, wow, that's a kind of a greed that we really wouldn't be guilty of or have to think about. But what about losing huge sums of money in gambling? Would you call that greed? Well, I think most of us would call that greed. Using our credit cards until we're bankrupt, or using our credit cards until we're in so much debt that we don't have any wiggle room. Is that greed? Well, yeah, but those are the extremes. What if I buy a television set last year, and then I buy another one this year because I want it to be a little bigger, and then next year I buy another one because some new feature has come out, and then the next year I buy another one, and at what point would you say, Alan's got a problem? He's greedy. He likes to spend his money on things for him. Or whatever hobby we have. If we're just continually buying and buying and buying, and everything we've done with our money, let's say the last 10 transactions or 50 transactions, is that greed? Or is that just the natural, I earned it, it's mine, I can use it, God doesn't care, I'm a good steward, I give him my 10% or my 15%. But if 10% or 15% or even 20% is just a minor, tiny part of our disposable income, where does greed come in? Where do we have to start thinking to ourselves, oh, wait a minute. I'm supposed to guard myself against every form of greed. Gambling is greed, I'm guarding against that. Midas would be greed, Scrooge would be greed, panting after the dust of somebody's head, coveting after other people's things, that would be greedy. But America opens up a host of questions that all of us need to be pondering. And again, this is one of those sermons that it makes you uncomfortable, but it's supposed to make us uncomfortable. We really need to evaluate this because there's lots of warnings in the scriptures that deal with this. Be free from a love of money, content with such things as you have. Are we content? Our entire culture, I'm borrowing from a slide that's going to come up in a minute, but our entire culture is based on planned obsolescence. It's based on the fact that what you buy this year will be obsolete. It'll still be usable, but it will be considered obsolete by most other people because of the new things that have come along. And at what point is my contentment a lack of contentment, even though I'm getting it from TV, I'm getting it from advertisements, I'm getting it from peer pressure, I'm getting it from other aspects of the culture? Be free from the love of money, content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will in no wise fail you, neither will I in any wise forsake you. And I think we see an important key here. Trusting in God, getting our contentment and our joy and our happiness from our relationship with God, and not allowing our physical possessions to somehow fill a little bit of that gap. In other words, there's a pleasure in buying things. There's an enjoyment in getting something that is a little better than what you already have. Now, when does that become a problem? Because we all do it. I've never met anybody in America who isn't willing, if something breaks, they throw it away and get another one, even though they might be able to fix it, or they exchange one thing for another thing because it can do it a little better, even though the one we have is fine, and it works fine, but this one does it a little better, so I'm going to do that. Some people upgrade their cell phones every year or every other year. They spend an incredible amount of money each year upgrading. Now, I don't know if there's anybody here that does that, but there are people that do that. Is that wrong? Is that a form of greed? And again, it isn't enough to just say, well, and what you're talking about here is something that is personal. It's for each one of us to decide. Well, I understand that. And I agree with that. And I certainly would not be interested in anybody saying, here's my checkbook, tell me if you're greedy, if I'm greedy or not. We couldn't do that. It's an attitude problem. It's an issue of priorities. We could take all of our money and send it to the poor in India. The brethren in India could use all of my money. The brethren in Malawi could use all of my money. Is that what I should do? Should I sell all that I have, give to the poor, and then just take a job, minimum wage job, so I don't ever have this problem again? Is that what God is expecting of us? And again, these are just questions that we need to be asking ourselves. Because contentment does not harmonize well with our culture and the way capitalism works. A perfect condition of life in which no aid or support is needed. A mind content with its lot. How did Paul put it? With food and clothing, we should be therewith content. Are we? Are we content with our food and our clothing? Is that all we think about? We don't need anything new. We don't want anything better. We're not constantly looking for somewhere to bestow our goods. You remember that man who said, well, I've reached this point in my life and I don't have anything to do with my goods, so I'm going to build bigger barns that I don't need and I'm going to put more in there that I don't need. And God says, you're a fool. Because everything you've laid up for yourselves is going to belong to someone else. And as Jesus pointed out, if we put our treasures in heaven, moth and rust cannot intervene. But again, our economy is based on planned obsolescence. And so here's the final question. Are ambition or the rewards of hard work, are they going to be condemned as covetousness? And the answer to that is they could be. It depends on what we're doing with our money. If it's my money using for my life and going to be given for my needs and my satisfaction and my happiness, and when an opportunity to give to someone who's struggling meets with that's hard for me to do, then we've got a problem. Even though we're doing everything right. That's why I say, in our culture, you can do everything right and get into a difficult set of circumstances, even though you've done everything right, because now you have things, and as God said, to whom much is given, much is expected. And we've been given a lot. We've been given an incredible amount of financial ability in our culture. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, are my good works keeping up with my prosperity? Or are my possessions, my own personal happiness and my own personal future, is that what's keeping up with my prosperity? And as I say, in and of itself, and that's why this is such a hard sermon to preach, because I can't really put my finger on it, and you have to put your finger on it. At what point does all of this prosperity and success and enjoyment equal greed, covetousness, or allowing our money to pull us away from God? So I'll just let you look at that while I talk a little bit more about this. It's just a continuing problem. Every week we get ads in the newspaper. Every week we get opportunities to look at things we don't have. We think about, what would I like to have next? Do I want a new computer? Do I want a new car? Is it right to have a car? Should I have a car every year? Should I drive a car until it dies? What are my responsibilities with my possessions? Is it time to get a new TV? Is it really time to get a new cell phone? Couldn't I wait another couple of years? Couldn't I use the money that I want to spend on that for a need? People are hungry in India. There are preachers that could be supported in Malawi. Our prosperity is kind of like a fog. It's hard to see through. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I may not give you the answers because we all have to work out our own salvation. We've all got to try to work through this and make sure that when we die and go before God, He's going to see us more like Dorcas, and the good works and the alms deeds which we have done are going to follow after us, and we will be wealthy, or He's going to see us as someone who selfishly squandered on himself. Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, or to fix their hope on uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things. Well, let's think about that. What does he mean by arrogant here? Does he mean I'm better than everyone else arrogant? Or does he mean I earned it, it's mine, I get to decide what I do with it kind of arrogance? Is he dealing with the kind of arrogance that would, as the proverb has said, give me neither poverty nor riches, lest I be full and deny you? Who needs God? One of the greatest hindrances right now in our ability to preach the gospel to people, not our ability, but their desire to hear, is prosperity. People don't think they need God because they haven't been crushed down. During the Depression, during the World Wars, we were, at least I was, hoping that maybe during this COVID breakout that some people would say to themselves, we don't have any security. We're in God's hands. We need to serve God. So what kind of arrogance? Those who are rich in this present world. So, is it me? When Jesus said, one of you will betray me, it astounds me. Didn't Peter know he wasn't going to be the one? Didn't the people who said, is it I, Lord? Is it I, Lord? Well, they were concerned. Are we the one? Are our hopes fixed? Got to make enough for retirement. Got to put all that money in because when I'm 65, I'm going to retire and I want to be able to do what I want to do, and so I can't give right now. I can't make the sacrifices. Wait a minute. You're making this much money and you have made the decision that all of it, isn't that a little bit arrogant? Do you know if you're going to be alive when you're 65? Is that such a crucial point? Does our money have no impact or impacts, I guess that should be singular, impact on our faith in God? When we get a bonus, what's our first thought? I have more to give to God, I have more for good works, or now I can get whatever it is that we want next. And some of us are insatiable. Well, actually, all of us are insatiable. We all could have more. We'd all like to have more. Whatever hobby we is, we'd like to. Whatever hobby we have, we'd like to think about those things. So instruct those who are rich. Well, we're all rich, brethren. Compared to what those people had back then, even the wealthy back then, compared to what they have, even the poorest people in America have wealth beyond belief compared to what these people had access to. So, I read this verse, I think to myself, well, the millionaires and the billionaires definitely need to read this verse, but I don't need it because I'm still poor. I'm poor by whose standards? Well, by my standard, really. Isn't that what it boils down to? We're poor by our standards. Those of us who have had the opportunity to visit a third world country, we understand how rich we are. And we'll never quite see our situation in America the same again. So, since we are rich, instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, ready to share, storing up treasures or treasure for themselves as a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. Now, the good news in this passage is he doesn't say charge those who are rich to stop being rich. Charge those who are rich, like, you remember the rich young ruler that came to Jesus? What do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Go sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and come follow me. He doesn't say that. It's all right. What we're doing, the lifestyle that we have here in America, is not a sin. It's actually a wonderful blessing. But it's a blessing with responsibilities. And learning to appreciate those responsibilities is exactly why this verse is here. Instruct those or charge those who are rich not to be arrogant. Not to be like that man who said, here's what I'm going to do because I'm in full control. Not to be like the person who thinks, this is all mine, I earned it, it is mine, I can do with it as I choose, because both of those are wrong. It is God who gave us the power or the ability to get wealth. It is God who blessed this country. The question is, do Christians living in this country, are they still acting like Christians? So instruct them to do good. So what kind of percentage of our money we give to the Lord on the first day of the week? What else do we do? What are the good works and alms deeds? When Dorcas had died and the widows were showing the garments that she had made, they weren't going to the treasurer and saying, how much did she give on the first day of the week? Instruct them that do good to be rich in good works. Generous. Ready to share. Is that me? Is that you? Is that how we feel? When an opportunity arises, do we look down and walk away, or do we jump right in? What can I do? What can I do? How can I help? This is how you lay up treasure in heaven, storing up treasures for themselves as a good foundation for the future. Jesus said, make use of unrighteous mammon so that when it fails, they will receive you into everlasting tabernacles. In other words, use your money in such a way that God will see us as faithful. So again, lots of questions, because I'm not in your mind and you're not in my mind. I don't know what you make, you don't know what I make. All I'm doing is giving us opportunities to consider. As I look back on how I've used my money this year, last year, the last 10 years. What's the percentage? What's gone to me? What's gone to the poor? What's gone to my future? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal, which means to hold to or be devoted to, and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And so our goals and our plans are based on our master. If our master is money, then our goals and our plans are centered around our money, what we're going to do with our money, and how we're going to live our lives with our money. But the Christian sees it, this is God's money. What am I going to do with God's money, the money that God gave to me in order for me to be able, yes, to live, and yes, to enjoy life? There's nothing wrong with enjoying life. Ecclesiastes continues with that. Enjoy the fruit of your labor. Enjoy your food. Enjoy your beverages. Enjoy your wife. Enjoy your family. Enjoy your hobbies. There's nothing wrong with that. But they have to be in the proper place. First priority is God. The second priority is the needs of God, which would be evangelism, edification, and benevolence. Then becomes the needs of our fellow man and our family and the different individuals that we're working with. So holding fast or despising the one or the other, I think a lot of us could probably see that if we just went through our checkbooks and our charge cards for the last year and look at where all the money went and how much thought was given to whether it was right to spend this on this when I could do this with it, whether it was right to live ourselves right up to the edge so that when a need comes, I can't help, I don't have any money. Well, why don't you have any money? Well, because I bought 3 computers and 4 phones and a new car and I don't have any money. Well, you go before God with that answer. Now, this is what we normally think about when we think about greed. Those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and snare and many foolish and harmful lusts which drown men in destruction and perdition. And since none of us here have gotten into that, we must be okay, right? For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, from which some, having strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. But as I said a moment ago, that's an extreme. Just because we haven't gone there doesn't mean that we don't have anything to worry about. Just because we have lived a godly life of hard work, and we have become very successful, and we have lots of opportunities with our money, and we have money in the bank, and we have money in retirement, and we have money for this and this, and is there anything wrong with that? No. No, there's nothing wrong with that. But it leads to arrogance. And by arrogance, I mean it leads to us thinking, this is mine, and it will be used first for me, and then whatever's left over, if there is any, after I've used it all on myself. Well, Alan, are you judging me? Are you saying I can't buy a new car every year? Absolutely not. If somebody wants to buy a new car every year, that's theirs. Like Peter told Ananias and Sapphira, while it was yours to do with what you wanted. Your money is yours. But on the judgment day, God may say, that money was yours, but you used it on yourself. You squandered it all on you. Now, you earned it legally. You earned it properly. You earned it. I'm proud of the way you earned it. I'm glad the way you earned it. I'm glad that you were able to enjoy your life. But where was I? Where were the poor? Where were the needs that came along? And in one sense, and this is the first time I've preached a lesson like this here, because I don't think it's needed. I'm not preaching this lesson because, oh my, I've watched you people, and this is a big problem. You're all a bunch of greedy people. It's exactly the opposite. But even if, how was it put? You remember when Jesus was watching the people putting the money into the treasury? And he said they all put in of their superfluity, which is a nice way for saying excess. Once they had everything they needed, then they could put the rest. So if you make $1 million in a year and you give the Lord 150 or 200,000, that's superfluity. But what about the other 800,000? Do you really need that much this year? What are you going to do with that kind of? Well, it's none of your business. It's my money. I'll do what I want with it. Well, absolutely, it's your money, and absolutely you can do what you want with it. But Jesus was more impressed with the widow who put in all that she had, even though it was a small amount of money. And that's really, I think, the point of my lesson, is that we might be a lot better off in a country like with Prince, where we don't have a lot of these difficult decisions. Because we only have enough to get by, and the little bit that we have that we share with other people, God's going to be really happy with. But then you bring us over here, and we have so much extra that it puts us into a really interesting situation. So even though we are not guilty of 1 Timothy 6, 9, and 10, I don't desire to be rich. It just came. I worked hard. I treated my boss with respect. I always came to work. I showed the people around me that I was an honorable person, and I got money. And I'm very comfortable. So I didn't. Verse 9 doesn't talk to me. Verse 10, the love of money. I never loved it. I don't want it. It just comes. But that's where the problem, that's where what Jesus was describing, that's where it comes in. So when Dorcas died, all the widows spoke of her good works. Is anyone going to feel that way if we die? Will it be a real loss to the church if we die? And I'm not talking about just first day of the week contribution. I'm talking about the way that we are living our lives and the way that we are making sacrifices. And so the best defense against greed is a good offense. When we're rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate. You know, Jesus spent a lot of time in his Sermon on the Mount, a lot of time in his parables, warning against the exact set of circumstances that we find ourselves in, to help us walk in chart and walk our way through it. And so he warns us, starting in chapter 6, about the love of money and about the conclusion, which is, seek first his kingdom. Don't worry about what you're going to wear. Don't worry about what you're going to eat. Don't worry about what you're going to put on. Don't worry about where you're going to stay. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And then we know. And it won't matter how much we have in the bank, and it won't matter how much we are preparing for our retirement, because the Lord will see that we have the proper attitude, and all of these other things are immaterial to whether or not we are a godly, righteous person. But the problem is that they can also be the temptation to lead us into circumstances where we don't want to go. So, if we're selfish, now I use the word miserly here. I wish I hadn't. The selfishness is such a difficult thing to pinpoint. And that's why I'm asking all of us to look at these things. We have a certain amount of income. And each year it goes up a little bit because a lot of us work hard and we are noted and we are given the opportunity to develop. Praise God. It's a blessing. There's nothing wrong with that. It's how it ought to be. We live in a country where things are the way that they should be. But it also creates dilemmas. It also creates events that we need to carefully consider. Because on the judgment day, God is going to be looking at these things. And there will be some who became a little too arrogant because of their wealth, stop relying on God, and may hear some things on the judgment day that they never wanted to hear. And so as we conclude our lesson this morning, how do we feel? Did we get through this lesson unscathed? I feel I'm fine. Alan went through all this. I don't do any of those things. I'm not one of those people, and I don't have anything to think about. But if we got zinged a little bit, we need to go home and make some decisions. I got zinged because I have a tender conscience, but looking it all over, I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. Or maybe we have to go home and say, something, I'm going to have to start making some different decisions about whose money is whose and which money should go where. So we need to be on guard against every form of greed. We need to be on guard against covetousness. We need to be careful that this world does not become our home and that we simply use our money for ourselves. But as I said earlier, there's nothing wrong with our country, our lifestyle, or the blessings that we have. They just give more responsibilities. We just need to be aware of them. As we pick up the song of encouragement this morning, we're going to sing number 311. If there's anyone in the audience today who is not a Christian, or who, for whatever reason, has been touched by this sermon or some other such set of circumstances, and they feel the need to become a Christian today or to repent of their sins and come forward and confess them, then as we sing this song, we'd like to give you that opportunity. So let's all now stand and sing.